Peace and respect to you all. Welcome to Demolished Doctrine. Tonight, an open conversation. Why? Because I'm sick of bad ones. I'm really sick of bad ones. Tonight, I heard a man say, you Christians, like there's some communal brain like the Borg. You Christians get corrected and you don't accept the correction. You've been corrected plenty. When are you going to receive the correction? And I'm putting it nicely, by the way. He didn't say it nearly this nicely or succinctly or directly. Not at all. And I had to wait a long time for the jokes to stop rolling, where no one wanted to address him. And he's combative. Okay, he considers Christians like one person, and that makes no sense. He's still a human being. And when he asks a question, if there's anything serious to be thought about within the question, it should be addressed like that, and only the important part. And he shouldn't be made fun of. Because you know what? We're not helping people like that who are combative against Christianity by being fair weather Christians when it's easy and when it's convenient. That is not what the Bible describes. In fact, it specifically says, what more do you do than the Nicolaitanes? What more do you do than the average person hanging out with their friends? If all you're doing is, this is a rant. Peace and respect. Welcome, Mac. Thanks for coming in. What do you think about that so far, Mac?
Well, I completely agree. I profoundly agree with the value of good conversation and the problem and frustrating nature of poor conversation. There comes a point where it's not even like interesting anymore when somebody derails things like that. In terms of the biblical criticism of that kind of behavior, I mean, that's sort of obvious, right? I mean, that's we're certainly we're it sounds like you were in an environment where there were people that should have spoken who didn't about the obviously aggressive and the aggression is not the problem. It's that it's an unproductive conversation and it's
right.
It's you're not deriving any value from it, and so everybody's sitting there wasting their time as a result. I mean, that should be offensive whether you're a Christian or not. Well, it seems to be to me.
I think your time is actually valuable. And if
Right.
you say something, if you think it's important enough to say, I'm going to think it's important enough to listen.
That's right.
And I hope that you don't say things that you don't find important. Now, if it's a joke and and it's just for a gag, I guess that's okay.
Right.
But
I mean,
if,
a lot of these
go ahead.
channels have the members of these channels have different degrees of performative sort of attitudes, and they'll sometimes they'll even talk about how they need to mix things up to get attention to their channels and things like that. There's definitely a motivation for being controversial and edgy, and I think that's super common. I think yours and Beck's channels are distinct because of the lack of that kind of nonsense. So, I mean, it's really rare to find anything free of that, completely free of that. Anyway,
Yeah.
sort of
Which isn't the same as Beck doesn't have a good time and they don't
of
joke
course
around and play. They do. They play all the time.
a bunch.
But
They have a great
but
time.
they interplay. No one is the brunt of the joke.
That's right.
And no one's
That's
being
right.
disrespected or ignored.
Exactly. Yeah, it doesn't feel like a locker room. It feels like a clubhouse.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I'm going to tell him you said that.
Nice.
That's a nice quote.
Yeah. Thanks.
I like
Yeah,
that.
so that's important. I guess the the next question for fellas like us is to, what do we do about it? How do we nudge things in a better direction? Do we avoid these kind of places, or do we continue to participate and try to steer the ship in a better way? Or
I mean, we can always try to set an example in our peer group. Always.
That's true.
I mean, someone said to me tonight, oh, he rage quit, because I said, well, you guys have a good night. This isn't my kind of conversation. I left. Right. But that was telling the truth.
That's perfectly
the kind of conversation where people are disrespecting each other. They're not actually answering the actual challenge. They're not answering the spirit of the question or the spirit of the challenge. And they're just making fun and egging it on and making it worse and frustrating the person, when I'm not going to mention the name, but the person is obviously a little bit, I guess we're all on the spectrum somewhere. There's no shame in it. He's got some mental challenges, and it's just evident that he does. And to me, maybe you can help me. I don't know where to draw the line. Some of it seems really obvious. To me, a lot of it seems really obvious. To some people, it doesn't seem so obvious. Is it wrong for me to kick over a guy in a wheelchair? Is that always wrong?
I do have thoughts on that. I think I mentioned before that I have some significant history working with people with different levels of mental disabilities, and
sure.
It was an important part of my life. It was really instructive for me about humanity in general and the value of humanity, regardless of people's mental abilities or sophistication.
Sure.
But the answer is anybody can be an asshole. And when they're capable of that, that's them being that way. Now, it's also true that regardless of your neurology, your problematic behavior probably has some kind of explanation that,
right.
A generous person might present as an excuse for your behavior. But so if this guy in the wheelchair is coming at you with a sharp piece of glass in his teeth,
mm-hmm.
you don't let him finish the trip. You kick the wheelchair over, and you hold him accountable for that behavior.
Yeah, sure.
And it becomes very complicated because you need to know too how you can hold them accountable. Like if they don't comprehend accountability, that's a huge problem. But it is them. They have, they have the ability to make choices and the ability to make poor choices regardless of their mental capability, and that's their choice. And so wherever they're at mentally, I think it's appropriate to hold them responsible, hold them accountable for that.
I've heard never do for your patient what your patient can do for themselves.
Right.
Not that I'm putting myself in the position of a physician. I'm not.
Sure.
But it still works. It still applies. You shouldn't do for someone what they're capable of doing, because you're only disabling them, and that can't be good for them, for their own self-image, for their own practical, all the way around.
I think that's right. I find it unpleasant when people pander to me or, condescend to me. I don't enjoy that, and I don't expect.
Have I ever made you feel that way? Have I ever made you feel that way?
Oh, have you? Oh, no, no,
okay.
You haven't.
I'm just checking.
I want to reflect on that a little bit, because you've intimidated me, and you've confounded me, and you've definitely challenged me in some specific ways that I don't think I've been challenged before. But no, Richard, you've always treated me with respect.
Well, I'd like to know if I ever did to anybody, because I don't mean to. And if that's what I'm doing accidentally, I'd even like to know when it's an accident. I'd like to know that too. Yeah. But I'm not talking about the guy in a wheelchair with, a submachine gun in his teeth.
Okay.
I'm talking about taking it, and I agree with you on everything you said, by the way.
Okay.
But I mean taking advantage of some obvious disability in a person.
Oh. Well, taking advantage of people is never good, I don't think.
So here's the problem. It sounds simple, right? Taking advantage of someone's disability is never okay, never
Right.
acceptable.
Right.
That seems really cut and dry.
Yeah.
Okay. What if the difference between them and you is about 10 points of IQ?
I think taking advantage of people in general is
Right.
problematic. Yeah. It's
Right.
exploitation. It's
Even if
not-
it was that small.
Sure.
And
Even
you're
if it
both,
was reversed.
totally physically, quote unquote, normal or average, in every way. One of
Yeah.
you have an IQ of 135, the other one has a 125.
Yeah. Irrelevant.
You're perfectly normal humans.
Yeah.
For the person who is slightly smarter, if they know that and they're using that to their advantage, or what if it's just your knowledge of argumentation?
Mm.
What if that's the only difference?
Rhetorical skill. Yeah.
Your rhetorical skill, right?
Yeah.
Is that also unfair and kicking a
Right.
person in a wheelchair? Because I think it is.
I think so too. Or your ability to use an intonation that commands attention. There's all kinds of unfair tactics in dialectic. Yeah, I think it is. I think that's unfair.
I do.
I feel like we're getting a little abstract, and I think you're thinking of a specific circumstance, but for
Not
me, it's a little
necessarily. I just
Okay.
see so much of it.
bit. Yeah. Yeah.
I once met a man. He's probably dead. Just because how much older he was than me, and his health was not perfect.
Mm.
His name was Robert Lancet. That is, his people came up with that diabetes test thing that goes and pokes your finger.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Anyway, he was like oddly brilliant, and he was aware of that. Okay, because he'd met enough people in his life that he knew he was like a lot smarter than everybody else he came in contact with on a regular basis, without purposefully selecting a group of super intelligent folks.
Right.
He knew he belonged. He would be
He
well
recognized
over everybody. He knew it.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But he also didn't think that he developed that. He thought that was a natural ability that he had.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so he didn't have a pride issue with it. So there were so many times, I knew him for about 3 years. There were so many times that I could absolutely tell. I mean, I'm smart enough to tell this, that he was dumbing down the ideas so I could grasp them.
Wow.
But he never did it in a way that was insulting or diminishing in any way. He always spoke to me as if I were an equal, and he was sure I was going to get it, But he had to use terms that he normally wouldn't have to. He normally could have used more shorthand.
Sure.
And more specialized terminology with someone smarter or more educated or something like that. But
So
he knew
made
that
it accessible to you.
Right.
Right.
And I never felt like he was putting me down, but I'm smart enough to tell that he was dumbing it down for me, which I needed. No joke, I needed it.
Right.
Like they were complex ideas.
So in that instance, he was being respectful.
See, precisely.
Yeah.
See, but you ever meet somebody who just had dirt farmer, no money? Peace and respect and welcome, immutable. Welcome.
Hey, how's it going?
How's it going? You ever meet somebody that just had, dirt poor, no money?
Yes.
Yeah, I've met a few people like that.
And a person like that, they're willing to give because they know what it means to be without.
That's true.
And you can also meet people who are just like really, really, wealthy, and they're okay with it. And they don't mind giving away some of their excess. They welcome you into their house. They're comfortable. They're not really worried about you, and they're okay. But you ever meet somebody with a little bit of money?
I know what you mean.
And they're like, I'm better than you. I don't
Right.
trust you.
Right.
You didn't work as hard as you didn't earn it like I did. You
Right.
don't add up to me.
You couldn't afford to live here. Somebody said that to me once. It was a specific memory.
You couldn't afford to live here.
I was taking
Okay.
a walk in their neighborhood, and they had the silliest little dog. And I always assume when people have silly little dogs that they understand that they're silly little dogs, and that's what they love about them. And so I said, "Oh, look at that silly little dog," and they took it personally.
I
And
guess so.
told me I couldn't afford the dog or a house in that neighborhood, and I shouldn't be taking a walk around there.
Wow.
It's probably true. All except for I didn't have a right to be in the neighborhood. I'm allowed to walk wherever I want. That's silly.
Immutable, you know what I'm talking about? Like someone in the military who's just got a little bit of rank, but they're not really important yet.
Yeah, I've known people with that. In terms of like knowledge, for instance, like I've met people who are scientifically minded and they know just a little bit of information, but they don't know enough to know what they don't know, if that makes sense.
It does.
Like they're enticed by the knowledge they have, but they're not. I would describe it as kind of like in terms of maturity, like they're not mature enough to really understand the limitations of their own knowledge, or like why they shouldn't be speculating about things outside of, what they already know.
And how do they treat others in your experience when someone meets that criterion?
When I see them interacting with people who clearly aren't scientifically minded, or who they think they have an advantage over, it tends to be like browbeating behavior. And I don't know, like it's natural for a way, like people kind of want to impress upon other people their knowledge, but it just, to me, it comes across as just being arrogant. And it's like, look, I probably know more than somebody on a given topic, but it doesn't really do me any good. I mean, that's the natural course of things. Even if I were to know more about, chem or bio or whatever, so what, right? There's somebody who knows even more than I do, and who knows it in more detail. Like, I don't. You, for instance, Richard, probably know more about religion than I do. So, I mean, really, comparing knowledge in that kind of way is, I don't view it as anything special. It's just like, look,
Right.
Don't be a show-off about it. I mean, if you want to have a serious, engaging conversation with people, don't go after the low-hanging fruit. Go after people who, have a shared level of knowledge with you, or have, maybe even a higher level of knowledge, to see whether or not your impression of some concept is actually accurate.
It'd be totally off topic and self-centric to start onto comments, but about that. But why do we kick each other? I mean, doesn't that just say, okay, if I recognize that someone, I have an advantage over them in some way, and I start taking advantage of that observation, I start applying it, and even if I am really like not insulting about it, aren't I taking advantage of them instead of like sharing and trying to lift them up? And doesn't that really just speak to my weakness?
I don't know. I mean, I think in some cases that's true, like where we project our own insecurity onto other people by trying to correct their behavior. But I think sometimes it's the case where, like, I've had friends who were about to make mistakes that I've already made, and I've pulled them aside, and I'm like, look, I understand your rationale perfectly. I was there once. Don't do it. Like,
That's a good friend.
Like, this is not, like, this may seem like a good idea, but if you choose to do it, like, it has, there's ramifications to it that you're not going to see till after the fact. And, look, if you trust me about this, don't, don't push up against that wall. You're not going to like what comes back from it. And
you see the scar on my forehead? This is a result of of me having done that.
Precisely.
Right.
It's like, look, don't be stupid like me, right? Like, look, I've been there, I've done that, I fought that battle. It doesn't go well. And I mean,
respect, Brother Kirk.
maybe in some way, like, that's me wanting to be, like a big brother to that person or something. But I think part of that for me is like compassion. It's like, look, if I can avoid, look, if that person can avoid, damage or suffering or, feeling embarrassed, I want them to to avoid that. Like, that's not a really, character building type of thing. But there's also things where, like with children or things like that, you do want them to make mistakes, right? You do want them to
That's
learn
true.
from their own mistakes, and you don't always want them to, to be right all the time. You want them to
Can we
understand the consequence of actions.
can we qualify that with we're going to discuss when wrong when it does? We're
I
going to
think
make it
so.
a learning opportunity.
I think sometimes though, you do have that phase of kind of reconciling the issue. But I think it's also important for the person to internalize it themselves. For the person to recognize, like, okay, I got this question wrong, or I did this, but this happened instead. But allow the person to kind of introspect on that. Like,
Maybe
okay,
that
why did this
in a parent
happen?
child, maybe that just the child might need something like some leading questions in
Mm-hmm.
order to ask themselves the right questions so that they internalize it, realize it themselves.
It happens with adults too, though. I mean, it happens,
Sure.
with people too. Sometimes adults don't always realize their error, and you kind of have to drag it out a little bit. And it's like, okay, now do you understand what I was why what you did was an error? Oh shit, I really fucked up. Yeah,
Yeah.
you did. Let's talk about yeah,
Right.
let's talk about it and be done with it.
So, Kirk, we're talking about what is abuse of others. What should a theist be exemplified? Because I hold them to a different standard. I hold everyone else to a human standard. But when someone tells me that they believe in a God, yeah, you just raised the bar a lot in how I think you should be acting. You know, so the topic is kind of what is and isn't abuse. And Mac brought up a really good question. What do we change? What do we do to change this YouTube community where there's people actually taking others in their own community into consideration in a respectful, non-abusive way that could be recognized by YouTube and maybe even promoted?
Hmm. I, I think the best is what you came back with is to lead by example, but also have discernment on when someone is just not going to grow, and you just have to let them fail, and you don't have to interact with them. And unfortunately, I guess not unfortunately, fortunately, that's the way Heavenly Father has created it, that to learn to be like Him, we have to have that discernment to know when is enough and what we're going to accept and what we're not going to accept, and hold everybody to the same standards that we believe are good.
How many of you are shocked if I say something like Kirk is a sports officiate? Doesn't he just already sound like that?
I don't know. I could kind of see that. I wasn't really anticipating it, but Now that you provide the thought there, maybe interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I mean, at least on his face right now, I have to say I have to agree with most of what you said, Kirk. At least most of it, maybe all of it. I'm not sure. So there is something to be said for the value of failure. I'm sure of that. And there's even something to be said for your investment in time in another adult who maybe, I don't even know how to say that, quote unquote, should have known this by now? Like you would have expected them to already gotten past this point.
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization.
But the problem I have with it is I don't know how to meter that, because okay, if they are at the point they are, and the quote unquote average or the median of people that age and that culture would have gotten further than that, aren't I just saying that they have some kind of delay in their process? Isn't that all I'm saying?
I think so. I think maybe there's a conceptual error too, where kind of like the way children can't grasp abstract concepts because they're abstract and they're not ready to kind of embrace it.
Right.
Over time, though, I mean, we introduce children to in ways that allow them to grab onto those abstract concepts and utilize them further, and it's a tool that people get. And I think sometimes it is true. Like, unfortunately, some people come from a background where their education isn't the best in the world. They haven't really been taught how to critically think or reason about the things they believe, or if they want to change their beliefs, how do you go about that process in a way that's effective or in a way that's, reasonable and sensible? And I think part of that too is like when we want to correct a person or we want to teach a person something, sometimes introducing the knowledge isn't sufficient. Sometimes it's trying to introduce a tool. It's kind of like if I told you to dig a tunnel and I told you everything you needed to do in terms of directions, latitude and longitude of where to dig the tunnel, but I never gave you a shovel.
Right.
It wouldn't do any good because
Well, you're
you
right,
might
'cause I'm
have the
not digging a
knowledge.
tunnel with a shovel anyway.
Well, but even if, but even if you had all of the knowledge, right, but you don't have the tool, you can't actualize that. You can't actualize that event. There's a gap in terms of the knowledge and how to utilize it, and I think that's an important gap.
Okay, immutable. It sounds like you've already thought about this in the past.
I think so. I mean, I think part of it is I think of myself as a silent observer, so I like to observe things from afar and take and give my own opinions on it. But
Right.
when people ask about solutions, about how do we engage people that have this deficiency or that don't have this skill, that's a very good question. I mean, it's one I'm open to in terms of the spectrum of answers that could exist, but I don't know which one is optimal. I'm not sure even if certain people can acquire certain types of skills.
It occurred to me, Immutable, while you were talking, the children analogy. What you do when you're dealing with a child whose brain just hasn't developed to the point to apprehend something that you're trying to explain, like, I don't know, object permanence or something like that. I guess that wouldn't be an explanation; it'd be more of a demonstration. But you can either wait for that brain to develop, or you can sort of encourage it. You can kind of address that problem directly, especially if we're talking about adults. And so if there's, I don't know, I guess I'm not explaining it that clearly, but here's my thought. Like, if I'm trying to explain something to somebody, an adult, and it appears that it's some kind of like insecurity or some kind of psychological problem that's interfering with their ability to even apprehend what I'm presenting to them, then the topic that I'm presenting to them becomes secondary. And I think what becomes primary is dealing with the block, dealing with whatever's interfering with the communication. And I think to Kirk's point, if we're people, and I assume we all are, that want to extend as much compassion and love to our community as possible, the question becomes, when does it become impossible? And so Kirk says there's a point where we walk away, where we let them fail without us. And I think that point becomes when it's really impossible. when we've tried to deal with the underlying blockage to the conversation, and even that has failed. Of course, I expect we all tend towards persistence in situations like that as well. So I'm not sure whether my point has any value now that I've talked it all out. So,
Yeah, I think that's a really convoluted issue. For instance, like when we're talking about conversations that involve like societies of people, or that may potentially revolutionize things like atheism, and trying to bring about like more secular philosophies into the world, that's a really tricky process, because you're overturning and you're kind of rewriting things as you go along, and you're also trying to educate people about this vast and intricate philosophical history that's been around for hundreds of years, but not really go too deep into the technical lingo where nobody understands what the hell anybody's talking about. I think sometimes, though, the progress we can make, like, because I'm an atheist, so I think sometimes the progress I can make is kind of limited to the culture I'm around, because I don't think cultures necessarily take in information at a uniform rate. Sometimes there's periods of stagnation, and sometimes there's periods of time where this culture understands, for instance, that, well, some people understand that, my lack of belief in a god, or my disbelief in a god, is kind of like my belief in, the color of the sky, right? I don't choose whether or not I think the sky is blue. It either is blue or it's not. And it's not really something, like, in my view, that I think I have control over in that type of way in terms of the formation of its belief. But in the same sense, like, that idea, that type of notion of beliefs, and if we're able to choose them, that's a concept that sometimes can take a while to manifest, in the minds of people, and for it to be recognized properly. And that's a very small ingredient into kind of this overall conversation about the existence of God, or spirituality, or secularism versus, religiosity, or whatever.
Okay, so everything you just said sounded to me like too many of us identify ourselves as our beliefs.
I think so. I mean, I think sometimes we like to have beliefs and we dress them up in fancy words instead of communicating what the belief itself actually is. And I think that's kind of sometimes like the error of modern conversations, is that, like, oh, I'm a utilitarian, like, oh, I hold to utilitarian ethics. Well, that's going to turn people off because they don't know what the heck utilitarianism is. If I were to just tell you, the form of ethics I utilize works on a principle where I want to maximize something for the most amount of people, that sums up what utilitarianism is. That's how ethical foundations using utilitarianism thrive.
Okay.
And I mean, I think the latter approach for people is more significant than, kind of dressing up the concept in a very philosophically dense and nuanced way that people have argued about for several hundred years now.
Well, I think when brains like Christopher Stumm and or Danny, if you guys know who Danny is,
yeah,
and they're in their groove and they're talking their special talk, and they neither one of them are actually showing off. It's just that's the shorthand they know for the conversation, and they use it because it's faster. You get to move forward faster and get into the meat of it without getting caught up in a lot of language. And I think that's the advantage of those proprietary, I'll call them proprietary terms. So I can see that. But when a person's using them and they're aware that the other person doesn't have that language, you're talking about something like that.
Well, I mean, I think a fair question to ask would be, when I walk into a room full of people, right, and obviously this depends on where I am or things of that nature, but given I walk into a room randomly,
Yeah.
what should I expect people to know about the topic? Like when the topic is introduced.
Right.
Like if I'm talking about the nature of morality, or if I'm talking about how it is, like we can, like how it is, like that if God exists, like could I falsify a concept in that notion of falsification, right? How much should I expect a person to know about that, right? Because there's kind of a common sense discourse in terms of what people have in terms of, for all intents and purposes, like kind of hot off the press beliefs. But to your point, right, people like Danny and people like me who try to keep up with Danny and stuff like that, there's also a very nuanced conversation about the importance of that type of system, and can it always be used, right? Maybe there's systems that, like, maybe there's claims that can't be falsified but nonetheless have value because there's something we use to categorize or to make sense of our world.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe falsificationism is not always an appropriate standard to hold something to. And how do you discern if falsification is the appropriate criteria for this compared to that, or yada, 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 yada. So,
to me,
I mean,
that speaks more to are they using are they using their or is their understanding even thorough enough that they can properly use?
right.
Is more what you're saying, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think
And I
that's
think,
fair.
yeah, I mean, I think the important thing is when we have conversations with people, I think it's all too natural for us to assume about people. It's all too natural for me to assume what a person might know instead of asking a person, well, do you have experience? Like, what do you think morality is? What do you think, like, what do you think it means to falsify something, right? What does
Right.
that look like in terms of an abstract notion, or in terms of something, something that we could apply to in a more universal way?
And that's just common consideration, isn't it?
I think so, but I think there's a frustration that comes along with it. Because
I think that common consideration has been lost so much that we don't, at least in my experiences, like so many people don't want to get to know other people and just accept people for who they are. There's so much that I gotta show my intelligence, or I gotta show there isn't a lot of relationship and wanting to just to get to know somebody because they're another human being and they're different than me.
But to me, that just sounds like I'm not actually confident. I'm pretending to be confident. That's how that hits me when someone does that. Like if someone says to me, Richard, you're an apologist for God. I say, no, God doesn't need explained nor defended, and I don't feel attacked because what I believe God is. It's simply what I think is true. So I'll explain it, and until someone does something like maybe they were trained to be offensive accidentally, they don't realize it, or maybe they're doing it on purpose. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes. But until they get to that point where they're being offensive, and I've already asked them to not do that and they've repeated it, I don't feel defensive about these things, you know?
Right.
So I think that's because I believe them. That's why I think that is. I mean, not that I'm doing it on purpose. It just seems to be the case.
Right.
So when someone doesn't display that, and they jump the gun and they get too defensive and they start making accusations, they start projecting onto others, it just looks like you don't really believe this, do you? Like you're just kind of playing with it. You're experimenting maybe, and maybe you're trying to get other people's reaction. Maybe you still need approval. Huh.
I live in a college town, pretty typical college town, and it's kind of a cliche for undergrads to take a couple of classes in a subject and suddenly be an expert on it. I don't know if
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
Do you know what I'm talking about? Immutable.
Oh, yeah. I remember that
oh,
phase.
Yeah, I totally went through the same thing. It's kind of, I guess it's a Dunning-Kruger type of a thing, you know, but it's also an aspect of youth, and it's probably healthy at some point. Like it's about getting excited about a new subject and feeling like you're apprehending the world in a new way. But yeah, I think that might be an aspect of what we're kind of closing in on, especially when we're talking about that specialized language, you know. I mean, and that's true for the theological debaters and the atheist debaters, you know, or whatever apologetics and debaters, you know, they learn this language, and then the language itself gives you a feeling of authority if you're able to utilize it in a smooth way. You can present yourself as an authority just because you're able to utilize the language, and there really isn't a necessary correlation between the two. You could be very clumsy with the language, but have a much better apprehension of the topic, for instance, although knowing the right words for the right things can really help discussions. But I guess really that all just brings back to sort of the original inquiry into the ethics of, you know, if there's this imbalance, if there's this, if one person's much more skilled in a subject than somebody else, what's the right way for them to approach an interlocutor? Should they be accommodating? Should they be impatient, you know, and insistent? Or Kirk, I don't think you and I have ever come across each other. Are you? What you've indicated you're a theist. Do you involve yourself in debates and stuff like that, or no?
No.
Just kind of like me, just along for the ride.
Yep.
Right on, man. Right on.
Kirk and I have a lot of fun talking about Bible theory.
Oh, okay.
Ah. Nice.
That's a whole different thing. That's not a debate. That's just a.
Yeah, I'm not
sharing.
much into. Okay, so I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and one of our articles of faith is we allow everyone the choice to choose how they wish to worship and who they wish to worship. So it's not for me to convert anybody. That is the job of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
I'm just to live what I believe, what I know to be true. So
Cool.
I don't do debates and stuff like that because I don't get any pleasure or passion or excitement out of that. I accept you for who you are and where you're at, and I love you just the same. So
I think the world needs more of that, though, too. I mean, because I think
Hell yeah.
our culture, you know, and that's the weird thing too. Like our culture always pushes us to consider, you know, each other's differences more than what we have in common. And I mean, I think even like in common parlance, when we talk, you know, people will find they have more in common with each other than what they disagree with, and usually it's over very minute details if it comes to like ethical theory or what they think about science or stuff like that. And I don't know. I mean, it's extremely weird how when you actually talk to people without using labels and just you come down to brass tacks about talking, you know, well, what do you think about this or what do you think about that without needing to bring in any of the lingo involved with it, you normally have a fairly good conversation. But if you consider
never thought about that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you consider like a mirror conversation, like if I start off like, oh, well, Like, oh, do you believe the Big Bang Theory or something like that? Well,
Mm.
some people, that's an immediate turnoff because the
Right.
Big Bang Theory means such and such and such and such, and it means evolution, and it means atheists are,
Right.
God-hating abortionists, and and it
You
just
came
sends
from a
them
rock.
off on this rabbit. Yeah, precisely. It sends them off this rabbit trail, and it's like, okay, but I don't want to know your perspective on all of those other things. I just want to know your perspective on this thing in
Right.
particular.
Right.
If we can, if you want to talk about those other things, maybe we can. But like, let's handle one thing at a time.
Word.
I never really thought about it, and I don't know. To my brain, you just said something important, immutable, and it's funny that I never thought about it because I have applied it in other ways in other situations. If you want to help someone along in a situation, and you want them to be more cooperative than combative,
Yep.
you neglect the word "you." You just don't use the word "you" ever. You say, I see this. This thing that I see is not working. And you approach it in that way. But I think you said something important, that you hear too many people going you, and maybe that's the defense mechanism, or the trigger for the defense mechanism.
Yeah, I mean, I personally think, because I've had issues with people where it's like, they want to go just to the chase, and it's like, oh, well, it's a you issue, and it's like, okay, look, I would be lying if I said it wasn't, right? But I was like, look, it's like, look, okay,
everything about me is a me issue.
No, I know. It's like, look, I'll give you the point, like, but there's something more fundamental to the thing I'm undergoing, or to the depression, like to the depression I'm having, or whatever the case may be, than just me. It's like, and that's the weird thing for some people. It's like, look, don't make this about me, right? Like, when I want like help from people, right? I don't want people to think like that I want attention from that. That's the last thing I want, right? I don't want to think I'm a burden to people, right? If you want to understand like an issue I'm having, or a thought that I'm having, or what I think, just ask me about it, right? It's the most elementary thing you can do.
What a weird approach.
Just ask me. Like, if I'm feeling down, hey, why are you
Right.
feeling down?
Right.
Hey, did something happen? Do you think that you telling me it's a me issue is really going to help raise my moral esteem? Oh, well, it's a you issue. Oh, great. Oh, yeah, that makes me want to pucker up and just be cheerful.
Of course, all of us are completely autonomous from our actual environment and all of humanity.
Of course.
So, of course we are. So when something's affecting you, it's just you. There's no outside influence to that.
No, it's just me, just choosing to have a moment for no particular reason. Nothing at all caused. Nothing at all. Just me in my own little bubble.
Yeah.
I'll just go fuck off.
All right, brothers. Thanks so much. I had a good time talking to y'all. I'm going to hit the road.
We'll see you
All
on
right, man.
Wednesday.
Take care.
Thanks, brother.
You too. Bye.
But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. It's disgusting. I mean, it's so unusual how we want to make things about other people instead of the issues themselves. Where when we want to attack an issue, it's just you personify the issue instead of just getting down to brass tacks with it.
Well, that's what I perhaps the thing I need the most help with is, and I'm not saying I'm innocent of this. I know that I've done this in the past. Okay. Am I my memories? Is that what I am? Am I my memories plus my potential?
Ooh, I think that's
am
a
I
really
my beliefs?
I think that's a really involved question. I would say I'm all of those things, actually. I'm, there's a set of biological factors that identify me as me, where if you could read out my DNA, you could say, oh yeah, this is immutable. This is somebody, this is somebody and not somebody else. But I think, that genetic content, those things that, comprise my identity change and kind of interact with my environment and inform certain beliefs and views that I have. If I was never exposed to people with certain beliefs, I wouldn't have the beliefs that I have. And I wouldn't have certain beliefs that I have innately changed, right? Or my perspective on those things to be reworked. So I think part of it is my volition. I think part of it is me wanting to find beliefs that correspond to my personality and that seem cogent to my mind. But I think part of it as well is the fact that I interact with other people, or I try to, and I want to see if those beliefs stand to hold any water, right? Can I interact with another person and have a conversation wherein two beliefs that conflict with each other, right? Can I defend my own beliefs, right? Can I actually ascertain why I believe what I believe is true?
And it's not that simple, but yes.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a simple process. I mean, I think it's important. I mean, I do think I think if you believe something and you're convicted by it, you have every, understand why you believe what you believe and how to defend it. Because if you don't, you're just going to end up following somebody else. And
sure,
I don't,
at that point, you're a kite.
Precisely. It's like, look,
you're just, wherever the wind blows you, that's where you went.
Precisely. And for me, that's something I don't want to, have happen to me. It's like, look, I don't mind accepting certain beliefs as just a matter of, as just being common sense and just being what cultures believe in certain common beliefs to accept. Okay. But I think that's different from, essentially being led to believe something by another person. Where, if somebody says something, I have to believe it.
And take a moment to say hi to the side chat, see who's out there. Welcome, Peebo Thulu, Cryptomeria, Assembly of God, Marty Camejo. How you doing, sister?
I think there were a few people. I think Midnight and Jamie Commander were asking for the link.
Oh, the link. Did I not put it in the description? I think
you emailed it.
I emailed it, but I can do this right here, and I can just put it in the chat. I'm not scared. But when you come in, I'm going to expect you to do something that couldn't have been pre-recorded. So you're going to have to turn your camera on at least for a moment, okay?
All right.
Because I'm going to request you do a certain thing. I'm just going to make it up in the moment because you can't have that pre-recorded because I'm making it up.
There we go.
So I know you're not just showing me film footage of a human. Or if I just happen to know your face, it's fine. Yeah, I suppose if you're a new person, I'm going to ask you to do something in the spur of the moment. I've seen people that they'll record a human being on a loop so that you never get to actually see their face.
Yep, I've seen that. That's
yeah, I'm keen to that one now. I'm hip, so that won't work anymore. Last show I did like this, it was just an open room. Every new face, I said, "Flip me off with your left hand." Have to use your left. Mess it up. There's Jamie. How you doing, bud? Peace and respect, brother.
How's it going?
It's going great for me. Have you been listening in? Did you just get here? What's the thing?
Oh, I've been listening.
Then the floor is yours, sir. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have a comment yet.
Okay, well then let me ask you a question so you can have a comment, so we can hear your brain about this and try to catch up with where you already are. Okay. So it seems, aside from our socially imposed value systems, that we tend to adopt our beliefs and memories and hopes and fears as self. And if that's true, I can certainly see why people get so damned defensive about it. But I have to ask a question like, if I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, and yes, I learned some things since then I'm always changing. And if I'm always changing, aren't I going to further change? Is that enough to get you going?
I just agree with that.
Well, that was no fun.
Well, I mean, let's see. Well, yeah, I don't know what else to say. That's true.
Peace and respect, Odie, and also Peebo Thulu.
Hello, change.
Hey, what's up?
Volume.
What do you guys think? Isn't it healthier if I think something like, what I believe is true right now may change if I find something more persuasive that either sharpens my point of view or changes it, or might even flip it completely 180? Okay. But certainly my views and my beliefs are not who I am. And I don't have to take it as a personal affront when you inquire about my beliefs, when you challenge my beliefs. What do you guys think?
I think
Depends
that's
what
reasonable.
you're defining as you. And I'd like to ask Immutable Destiny a question.
Sure, feel free.
Cool. Wait a second. Just to find it. Yes. What do you think of, or can you explain what Neurological nihilism is? Because I found it on the
Right.
internet and it fascinates me. Sorry to derail, but it's kind of.
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
But it kind of fits. I
yeah.
think.
Let's see. Mereology, if I recall right. Actually, let me just Google the damn thing, because it's been a while since I've had to
I thought Neurological
engage.
The parts or something.
Yeah, so mereology, according to the Wikipedia, so take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Logic or philosophy. Mereology is the study of parts and wholes they form, whereas let's see. So it's essentially it's just the study of parts and wholes. So kind of the traditional thing is the paradox of the one and the many. What is it that comprises the many from the one if they're composed of the same parts, type of thing? Are you asking, do I hold to mereological nihilism, or
No. I was how would I go about getting a book that would delve into that better? Because again, I've just hit the wiki. Because I was heard in a conversation somewhere else, looked on the wiki and went, "Oh, that's really interesting."
I really have. I'm not sure. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy might be a good resource for looking into that. I don't know. I don't know if there's many like technical resources based upon like people studying mereological nihilism itself. Because mereological nihilism will assert something like, what it will essentially say is that there isn't a thing that distinguishes the part from the whole. Right? There isn't something you can add to the one that makes it, right? That has it become the many. In the case of the one and the many paradox. But they're different for some type of reason. Maybe it's how how something relates to something else or whatever. But yeah, I don't know. I've never really looked into it too much.
Because that, for me, it comes back to what Richard was saying about what is it to be you? Because we've got the physical, and then we've got the plasticity of the brain, which is in us, but generally most of us consider us to be the thoughts, which is actually what's happening in our brain.
Yeah, I would say actually take a really weird view on personality in the mind itself, where to me it doesn't seem that when we describe a person, be it by their behaviors or be their beliefs or be it some type of like neurological architecture that to appeal to in order to form that concept, those things will change. They will always change, right? And the way that those things are related to each other are going to change as well. So I don't, that question of kind of how do you make sense of what a person is or what a self is? It appears to be something that's true, right? Like the person I am is different from the person that Richard is, and so on and so forth. But I don't know how to quantify that, right? I don't know what things to appeal to, or what relations to appeal to with those concepts to describe a person in a way that's abstract and cogent.
Doesn't it come up to be something that, well, kind of connects to the idea that you need continuity of consciousness or whatever to remain the person you are? Like that's argued sometimes. Didn't this come up when William Lane Craig talked to Cosmic Skeptic? Or am I thinking
I think so. I mean, maybe this gets off the conversation, but I mean, it kind of brings up the whole like Terry Schiavo scenario, right? Where it's like, suppose you have a person, right, who lives a perfectly normal life, has an extreme, accident, where for all intents and purposes they're alive, but they have no they have no mental activity. Does the person still have a personality, right? Is there something of that person that, like where that personality is?
Are you talking
right,
about
if that makes sense?
Sorry, are you talking about the railway spike guy? Or the guy who had the injury that stopped his short-term memory? Or the guy that Metallica made the song about?
The guy that they made the song about. It's a real person, by the way, Terry Schiavo.
Yep. Mm-hmm. But
what's the song? The Metallica song plays. I need the reference.
Or maybe explain.
So the guy was in the First World War. Went over the top. The horror of the First World War. In the ceasefire, the next day they go over. They collect the bodies. They pick him up, and of course, his body's warm. Yeah. So he's not dead. Oh, he's taken a head wound. So they off to the field hospital, that sort of thing. The doctors examine him, and he had a certain type of head wound, and this is where Immutable Destiny knows it more than I do, because I just know it from the song. And I think they made a movie about it too, because there's film clips. So basically, the person's the bit of the person that is the person is physically disconnected, like the bit of the brain that is, is severed from the rest of the body motor control.
Yeah. Okay.
The best I think he could do was move his head, but and I'm not sure if the nerve feelings going back the other way were also severed. Like he couldn't hear, he couldn't speak, and so you've got this quandary of like, is this person a person? Yada yada yada. And I think in the end, which is the whole point, is in his, because he couldn't tell if he was people are subjectively putting themselves into his head.
Right.
He couldn't necessarily tell if he was awake or asleep or whatever. He, constantly in this limbo. And so eventually he kind of realized that he had some feedback from movement, and he started shaking his head SOS.
Okay.
To see if there some other feedback would come in. And I think the people on the outside saw this rhythmic movement, deciphered it, and went, oh my God, this person's still conscious in this state of which we can't do anything about.
Right.
Because it's the 1920s, barely.
Right.
Like, even today, I don't think we could do anything for the war bastard. I'm not at the time. I think the nurse killed him, but that may have come across the movie. So it was we'll put him out. We can't help him.
Oh wow.
We'll pass him on.
Catatonic or whatever.
No, he certainly wasn't catatonic.
He wasn't.
Oh, he wasn't, because he was communicating, right?
He was trying to communicate with the outside world, but he didn't.
All he had
he
left
didn't have
was some muscle movement. He couldn't hear. His eyes had obviously been blown away. All that sort of thing.
So,
I'll let Immutable. He obviously knows the story better than I do.
That's
so I'll shut
about
up.
yeah. That's about that's about accurate. I mean, that's what I know of the story as well. I mean, it's been a while since I've seen the film.
That'd be like waking up into a
it.
dream that you can't get out of.
Pretty much.
Wow.
the worst nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, it raises
culturally the worst nightmare is waking up being buried alive.
Right.
There was an entire morgue set up under the Church of Notre Dame where they would lay recently deceased people out and then tie a bell to their foot. And if the bell did not ring after 3 days, then they'd bury them.
Mm-hmm.
Because at one stage it was, it seemed to, for whatever reason, it seemed to be a thing that people were collapsing comatose. It might have been their diet at the time. It might have been some other thing. And they weren't dead. And again, given the medical skills of the day, I think this is like the 1500s, 1600s.
Heard of this.
Yeah, they couldn't down. So they were putting people in boxes and putting them in the ground.
We still can't define exactly what death is today. I mean, it's an argued.
Well, when your cells start breaking down, you're pretty far gone.
Well, yeah, but like when is the person dead? Is it when their heart stops pumping? Is it when their brain activity is totally ceased for X amount of time? Because people get brought back. Were they really dead? Those questions are interesting.
From what little layman I know, they weren't, to quote Miracle Max, they weren't totally dead. They were still partially alive. So that's hence, people didn't go through their pockets looking for loose change. So
okay, guys,
that's
I'm going to
why
go smoke, but you guys carry on. Keep having a good time. Keep exchanging brains.
Yeah. So didn't Odeon want to ask Immutable something? So I'll shut up.
Yeah. To your point of like Neurological nihilism, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the belief is really tenable in itself, right? I mean, even though there isn't like a way to like properly like separate a distinction between the one and the many, or rather, what it is about the one, or what it is about the many that makes it different from the one. It's clear that there are one and there's many. So I don't know if there's much work that's been done on Neurological nihilism. I'm sure there's probably people out there who know a lot more about that than I do.
So it's just a denial of composite objects. It's just like a denial of, that's what Cosmic Skeptic appealed to it to try to get out of the Kalam.
It's not a denial of composite objects. It's what the one in the many tries to establish is this. It tries to say something like, what the one in the many tries to say is like, imagine like water, for instance. And there's two notions that I could appeal to. I could appeal to the type of molecule like that corresponds to water and its particular geometric structure. But I could also refer to something like where water is in a liquid form, right? Like a glass of water. The one in the many paradox is about this thing of like, what is it about an object, right, that allows us to say, like, that it's a complicated paradox, and it's why I'm having trouble phrasing it. But
well, I fell into it with what is a chair, that question.
Yeah, it's
like
asking
a
the
chair
question.
Is something we have literally created. It's a concept that only exists for us.
Right.
So what we currently sit on, by mutual agreement through the language and that sort of thing, we say that is a chair. And then we break that down into subcategories of stool, futon, not futon, beanbag, yada yada yada. But anything that we put our gluteus maximuses on can effectively, by default, become a chair. So we can sit on a windowsill. We can sit on a rock.
What about a big spike during the Dark Ages that they forced somebody to sit on? Is that a chair?
Well, no, that's not forcing. That's called impalement. That's thank you, Mr. Vlad Dracula. Yay.
I was trying to
going
find
in completely the wrong spot. That's
I was just trying to
completely
find a
missing.
hard example of qualifier.
Well, that's the thing, that like because chair is just a concept, that goes back to the neurological nihilism of it doesn't have a hard. You know what I mean? Like hand, as opposed in relation to hominid, that has a definite hard line. That word corresponds to a specific reality.
What if you glue a pop can on where your hand was cut off and you put it where?
Well, no, then you don't have a hand.
Is there
You've lost it?
This kind of get into essence and all that.
But again, yeah, and neurological nihilism sort of, as I said, because that which is us is actually also comprised of billions of cells, but they're all us. And then those cells are comprised of billions of atoms, but they're still, air quotes, which I don't have my camera on, us.
Yeah,
quick
there's
question.
You're sure. Go ahead. There we go. I think it might be good to illustrate the type of paradox by way of one of the philosophical thought experiments that do it really well. And there's two that are kind of pertinent, but so there's an idea of like, so is anybody here familiar with the idea of Theseus' ship?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's essentially that puts into articulation what the paradox is. Because the whole point of Theseus' ship, where the soldiers and this captain goes out to sea, the ship gets sunk, this museum is erected, they build an exact replica of the thing, and over time, the pieces of the ship are reassembled so that you have the ship that was once destroyed now turned back into the original ship. And the question is, which one is the real ship? That's the type of thing that the one in the many paradox is referring to.
Yeah.
Because there's this question about what separates something being one from something being many, and how we can separate the two. I think
that's why
I don't know.
Continuity of is like, yeah, there's so many interesting questions here, I think. So
I think some of it might boil to a semantic difference as well, right? Where it could be, right? In the case of a single molecule of water and a glass of water, there's nothing that's different about the two, right? They both comprise the same parts, right? There's nothing about one that is different from the other. But yet they're different from each other. And that might just be something, that just might be something like an accidental property of water, right? That at large scales, large molecules of water that are assembled together, right, take on an appearance or behave in a way that you wouldn't expect of a single atom of water.
What would the other option be if it weren't accidental?
I don't know.
Incidental, or what are the different things it could? I can't think what it is.
Yeah, it's been a while since I studied. It's been a while since I studied like the metaphysics of that in terms of like causation and accidental causes, or whatever it is.
That it gets into that. I think an interesting version that I think I've heard people talk about before is like why essence is necessary, like, and you can take that theological, but like I like this question where it's like, it seems like you could replace every neuron in your brain one at a time with like a synthetic electronic version, and at no point in exchanging them, say like spread out over a period of time, one at a time, you would integrate that into your brain, let's say, and then eventually you could replace each neuron with like an electronic, and then it seems like there's no logical barrier there to like.
Yeah, you're talking about
dozens of science fiction stories explore that. That's why you have. I highly recommend everyone going. and finding Masamu Nishiro's original 1980s Ghost in the Shell.
Oh yeah, I love that
American, which series? The latest one with Scarlett Johansson was a really bad remake of bloody RoboCop. But the original manga is probably the best work because it's the original work with his original concepts as written 40 years ago. Because he's since gone on to explore that. Because again, in Ghost in the Shell, he takes full body cyborging to its extreme, and then actually, if anyone's familiar with Battle Angel Alita, which they also made a good movie about.
Yeah, I love that show.
So you've read the original. Has anyone read the actual manga? Because there's something that they've changed in the movie. So in Battle Angel Alita, the elitist people who live in Typheres, they do a medical practice. I put air quotes around that as their coming of age ceremony, which leads back into Immutable Destinies. No, into Jamie Russell's thing of. So if we can, and I'm not sure on the ethics, but I believe people are trying to simulate neurons up to a human brain level, and then you get into the whole uploading consciousness sort of thing, Altered Carbon also had the multiple copies of people thing happening, because that's potentially what happens when you follow those sort of thought experiments down their rabbit holes.
Yeah, I mean, this is very similar to what's called the teletransporter paradox, and the paradox does this. Essentially, it says, let's imagine you wanted to go to Mars, but you didn't have any resources to do so except by means of this transporter.
Star Trek?
Kind of. This came before. This might have been based on Star Trek, actually. But
the Star Trek one is sanctified murder.
Yeah, I'm not sure. This is probably inspired by it. But what it does in this case is, it says, you enter inside the machine, but what it does is it tears your body apart atom by atom. But at the same time, this machine on Mars reassembles you atom by atom.
No, right? It reassembles atoms in the shape of you atom by atom, because they're not the same atoms. The atoms don't get transferred, only the data.
Right. Well, the entirety of the structure at that moment of time is recreated in the exact proportions to where you are.
Identical to the core.
Precisely.
But fundamentally, they're different atoms. So we get back to the ship of Theseus thing.
Right. Well, and the thing is, the logical question that gets brought up from it is, was the person that was just reconstructed, or constructed rather, on Mars the same person as you, or was he different?
I'm a Christian and I say absolutely yes.
Well, okay. I mean, why? Why would you say that there's a difference between the thing that just materialized and what is you?
You could say you died still, I would say. I would just say, I'm a Christian. I'm a physicalist, I guess you'd say. So I think humans that is who you are. Period. You could have copies, yes, and that they would all be you, and then they diverge. And
but here's the interesting thing too. This copy of you, right, if you want to call it that, it has all the same memories and experiences that you did, or at the very least, it believes it does. Right. So if you were to ask the person a question like about you, like what's your favorite TV show, and let's say you said Seinfeld or something like that, I don't know.
My favorite movie is Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Okay, so if you ask that question to this person that's formed on Mars, and you ask the person, "Oh, what is your favorite movie?" It would say Sixth Day. In fact, everything that identifies you as you, it would have, and it would also have the same beliefs and intentions and desires and expressions as you do. Right? It would be.
So why wouldn't it be me?
Because right, it's not made up of the same stuff that you were. Because all of the atoms that were you are still on Earth. All of the atoms that are this other were taken from Mars.
Quick time out. Peace and respect. Welcome, Black Mamba.
Oh, hello.
Thanks. If I would like to chime in here actually, and I would
Sure.
like to. So basically, from what I'm understanding, the main question here is really an existential one, and it's whether you are your brain or what is the essence of you. Am I correct?
So the question is about identity, right? Is what are the factors when we talk about something like personality or a person in this case? What is it that we're appealing to when I say like that I'm immutable? What is it about me that's appealing to? What types of facts is it appealing to make that inference?
Pattern.
And that's what these paradoxes are drawing into question.
I mean,
Right. So.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, from a theistic perspective, although I'm not a theist, but I can imagine that theists would like to use God as the answer, and they would say, "Oh well, we are spirit. We are not our brains. We are not our bodies. We're some, some of these New Age people. They believe that we're an energy being or some kind of being, metaphysical, spiritual, transcendental kind of
Type of thing.
creature. And so this really then can translate into a belief into the afterlife, right? But then when you look through a rational scientific lens, it's really hard to justify that or to even reproduce that in a experimental setting.
Right.
Doesn't it also raise? I believe there was a philosopher, but I can't remember his name, who the only reference that's coming to the top of my mind is and show references as well as the ghost in the machine, because it just now kicks the problem sort of one step backwards. If there's a soul in us, then that just pushes that back. It kicks the can down the road a step.
I like to say
now,
the mind
instead of just fighting about us, we have to fight about, well, okay, what is this really poorly defined other thing that you've added, which is the spirit?
Yeah, so the thing is, by the way, Bebo, what you tried to answer, what you tried to resolve the paradox with doesn't actually resolve it.
I was trying to resolve something?
Well, when you said, for instance, it wasn't made of the same atoms, that retort can be applied to people in general, right?
Yeah. But the teleporter thing is just a quicker way of getting there.
Right.
It is. But I think what defines, if I were to try to answer it, and this also wouldn't work because there's a similar retort that can be given, is I would say that there's something more abstract, like that defines a person, and I would say there's types of spatial and temporal relations regarding humans that define them and that comprise their identity. Like, yes, it might be true that you could reconstruct me with all the types of with all the atoms in the same place that they were a nanosecond before I was copied or things like that, right? But the fact of the matter is, what those structures are, right, have interacted with various things that brought them to that point, right? And it's by virtue of those interactions that they're in the state that they're in. That history, I don't think, can... I guess what I'm saying is the prior states of my brain, the prior states of what I was, right, are directly responsible in a temporal way to where I am currently in the present. And I think if you were to just recreate that all at once, inside, on the planet Mars, right, I don't think it would be the same person, right? I think there would be some type of distinction in terms of...
Have you ever taken Vicodin and drank a glass of wine?
No, I've not.
Well, if you do, you find yourself suddenly somewhere else all of a sudden, and I think you're still you. I mean, everything intrinsic to your state at a certain point would still be recreated, so it'd still have the same...
Okay, on that one, I want to know what Odian was going to say.
Yep.
Oh, so I was more so going to. I was more so actually taking the route where Richard was taking it, where you're basically the sum of your experiences, um, and your beliefs. Well, beliefs to an extent, right? I think if you were to be born in a different location at a different point in history, right? The individual that's you is going to be very different, right? If they were to make two exact copies of you, right, have one live the current life that you live, right? But let's say hypothetically there's another world, they take you to a a war-torn world, right? You live the same amount of time, experience the same amount of things, you're gonna develop into two very different people because you've experienced two very different things. Or you see what I'm saying? Your beliefs are most likely going to be different. Um, so I think that's probably a more realistic way to look at it. I don't I try not to take a reductionist view on these things because you run into all of these paradoxes.
Well, a physical example of what you just said are biological twins, who are the right sort of twins are effectively clones of one another. So even though they're identical to percentages of their DNA, they still evolve different personalities through their subtly different experiences.
Yep, and it's crazy. You could probably even have both of them raised in the same household, but they grow to be two very different people, even though they might have pretty much the same experiences, right?
Don't we have to accredit some of that to epigenetic expression, and because they didn't have exactly the same experience?
Can I pose a question built on that real quick? I've asked people this, and I find really interesting answers from different people, surprising answers based on their worldview. But okay, let's say with the twin thing, let's say you have identical twins, and I mean like, identical in a lab or something. Okay, now just this is probably not feasible, but it's just logically speaking. Let's say
it's not ethical,
right? But let's say feasibly, let's say you could do this. It's not a logical impossibility, but you have identical clones in a petri dish or whatever with identical conditions, and then you grow them in absolutely identical. We're talking gravity, barometric pressure, temperature, all that. Okay, identical, and you put them in identical simulations or scenarios where I mean like the first moment of their life is experiencing the exact same everything.
Sure.
Would they ever diverge and be at all different things? Would they show?
Because A, their fingerprints are different, and B, certain fundamental wiring in their neurons will inherit, because that's biology. It's messy.
But I mean, I'm saying they have the exact same genetic code, identical.
That doesn't matter. It's the code. Yeah, so, the code is just the blueprint. It gets expressed, so it grows the body. Then, as they grow, yes, they'll have all the same parts in their brain that do the same things, but how the neurons wire themselves for specific things will be as different as their fingerprints. So even though they both have speech centers in their brain, the neuron wiring for them speaking will be different.
What's determining the differences?
Random luck in how the neurons are spread through the grey matter, I'm pretty sure, at a fundamental level, because again, how the cells divide will not be identical.
There'll
be subtle just through random. Welcome to chaos in the world. It's random stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's part of it too. I mean, I would also appeal to things like qualia, for instance, where even, and granted, I think qualia is a kind of a weird concept that's neurologically.
I find that answer amazing. I can't. What would possibly be the causation of the differences?
Wait, let's go around the room because it's a really good question. Let's go.
Because as you're introduced to new concepts, right? So I introduced the new concept into this room to all these 6 people plus the people in the chat of ploying. So me saying that word, your brains all now wire themselves for that new concept, but you all do it. All the neurons do it differently, and that's just the random aspect of biology. It's like everyone's intestinal tract is all bunched up in a different way because it's just how it happened. But it all starts at the top and ends at the bottom.
Right, and I think part of it too is like this idea of quality, and also just kind of, even if two people are identical, right, that doesn't mean the way they perceive things or how they internalize and represent certain concepts are going to be identical to each other. In fact, they're going to be probably very different.
Hello.
Peace and respect, Midnight. Give him a minute to finish the thought.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Immutable.
Yeah, and I mean, I think part of it is how you internalize and how you represent certain concepts in the world will will inform how you interact with the world to an extent.
So basically, it's the process, the process in which our brain, basically, it's not as clear cut in that how the brain. You know what? I have a really good example of this. Altered Carbon. I don't know if you guys know that show on Netflix where
it started out fantastically and the ending was shit.
Oh my goodness! I knew someone was going to say that.
Well, I mean, yeah, I know, I know the show you're talking about. I just haven't watched it yet. But from what I remember, it tries to say that our consciousness could be transferred to another body, or it paints a picture that you can do that. But go ahead.
Yeah, so that's the idea about, well, the general concept of it, right, is that you can back up your whole personality on basically a drive, right? And you can plug that drive in a different body. And so what's interesting is that there are a few interesting instances where the main character, there's a point where there was two of him, right? There's a more seasoned, experienced version. And there's a younger version, and it so happens, they did battle or whatever, and they came right back to the same beliefs despite having very different motivations and intentions at the end of the day. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Not only that, the main character, he had switched bodies a couple times, right? But as he switched bodies, his personality evolved. Now, that's more of a fan fiction-y rumor type thing. Some people are saying it's deliberate on the director's part. Some are saying it's not. But I can definitely see that. So just kind of, I'm bringing that up just to kind of keep it in mind, and that you never really know what you're gonna get. And I think that's a beautiful thing. How our brain processes these experiences are very different.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
So despite the circumstances,
Well, I mean, I believe I mentioned this. That the reason why everyone's brains processes things differently is the way the genes express themselves. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Through fertilization, like the mother and father DNA, like DNA goes. I think I'm again, like I'm not an embryologist or whatever. I just know that I think both both the sperm and the egg and the DNA in the egg gets sniffed and like retooled, but also epigenetic factors or contribute to which genes will be expressed during development and later in life.
Well, and to take things a step even further, right? There's genes that have been passed down for millions and billions of years, but the functions of those genes and how they express and how they survive in an organism has changed over time as well. Mm-hmm. And that's also going to have an influence on an organism and various things contributing to an organism's, development.
I believe the same.
Quick observation, guys. Quick observation. Black Mamba has been holding back, and it's killing them. You want to go ahead and take the floor for a minute?
HP Black Mamba. Okay,
Yeah,
there's already a Black Mamba in the community. Okay, you need to distinguish.
I just
Go ahead,
wanna say, going back to the example of the twins and also the one of the flash drive, taking this flash drive of consciousness and putting it in somebody else's body. I guess then, the main question here would be, what is consciousness then? If, let's say, you were able to make a copy of yourself, or maybe they were unable to make a copy, but they could copy your consciousness and put that in somebody else's body, would that even be you? Because now, maybe they put it inside of a robot. Maybe they put it inside of a smart car, or like what's that, Knight Rider?
So that gets into what is you, and I remember this from Heidegger's Eternal Golden Braid, which was Escher, Bach, and I can't remember the third one, but he quotes Nagel's What It Is to Be a Bat. And so if you could take a human brain and put it into, make it fit into a completely different organism, then that brain gets would then be fundamentally changed. And then you also get into a lot of science fiction tropes of if we do get to the bio and cyber tech of being able to do that, how is it going to affect our experiences, which partly affect what it is to be us?
Let's take it for the hell of it, right? Let's just take it to one level deeper of abstraction. Let's imagine simulating the experiences of a rock or something like that, right? You could do that, right? There's physical parameters that you could simulate that and transfer into bits that are that could be conveyed or that could be interpreted by neurons.
But a rock doesn't. Go ahead. Finish.
Well, but could you then say a rock has consciousness, though, right?
Well, yeah,
if you're able
really
to.
Doesn't.
Well, why? Right? I mean, if we're able to simulate the processes of a rock, and that rock responds in certain ways, and that course of that rock, changes in certain ways.
Because it's your consciousness understanding a rock, not a rock understanding your consciousness.
Well, but isn't that just appealing to our reference frame?
Yes.
But a rock doesn't have any processes. It's static. That's like saying, what processes does a diamond have, or a snowflake?
Well, it gets exerted to...
static. They are locked in a moment of time.
I'm sorry. I just want to find out, how do you know that a rock is not trying to understand your consciousness?
Because I've already had a discussion about Richard about the Narragansons and the stars, and I don't want to get into that again.
There we go. Can't say I blame you. But yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't think it's coherent or really useful to talk about rocks as if they had consciousness. But in a hypothetical scenario where you could simulate processes that rocks undergo perfectly, it's conceivable, right? There's a potentially sensible way in which you could say a rock has some experience of consciousness.
I don't know.
Just that we wouldn't be able to understand it.
No, I don't
think
see
my
how
level of awareness
literally
is
static.
being lent to a rock.
And that's like saying an iron bar.
Oh, okay. Let's take it. Let's put it this way.
It's static.
If a person remained static for their whole life, but by all intents and purposes had interactions in their life,
then no, they can't. That's not how that works. They're frozen in time. Now we're getting into who wrote Riverworld? Philip Jost Farmer. That gets into The Stone God Awakens. So basically, the premise of the story is a physicist is struck as a side effect of an experiment, and all of his atoms are frozen at that moment in time, as well as, I think, 2 meters of the surrounding space.
Mm-hmm.
So he becomes a functionally static diamond.
Wait, what is this? Sorry, I was responding to something. What about diamonds and
Philip Jost Farmer, The Stone God Awakens. the same guy that did Riverworld. So the premise is the person's atoms are all frozen. He stops. He becomes solid. Actually, he also becomes a lot denser as well, because he's not just frozen as in low temperature. The motions of his atoms are stopped.
That's
through this quirk of whatever experiment he wasn't aware of going off and striking him.
Yeah.
So the world around him goes, oh, he's dead because he's solid. And so they mount him in a museum of, oh, here is this person who posthumously gave his life to science, yada, yada, yada. Millennia goes by, and whatever the effect was that froze him pops out of existence, and he comes back into reality. So it's kind of like a H.G. Wells's time machine, just throwing the guy forward, not backwards.
Did they have the body under nitrogen gas to preserve it? Did he die immediately?
It doesn't need it. It literally doesn't need it, because the state that he's put in freezes him at an atomic level.
Can we talk about Mr. Dr.
But in
Manhattan?
that case, he's not sentient. He's frozen. He's solid. He's static, like the Rock.
I know, but I want to talk about Dr. Manhattan next, because what happened to Dr. Manhattan in The Watchmen is just as incredible. Because if I remember correctly, during like an experiment, his atoms literally get ripped apart. Yet somehow he gains godlike powers and comes back through sheer will. Like, what the fuck?
Well, yeah,
I
because
love that.
he is so expanded that he can understand things. He can not only understand things, but manipulate things at an atomic level. So what you actually see reconstructed is him personifying himself back into reality. That's why he's blue and naked. But he doesn't do a complete job of it, because he's now become subtly or drastically disassociated from what it is to be human, because as they point out in the comics, his consciousness does not just exist when you, the viewer, see him in the cartoon frame. His consciousness exists forward in time and is fully connected, and backwards in time, because when he confronts Ozymandias, he says, you figured out my blind spot, which is whatever radiation was that caused him. Hence, Ozymandias kept what he was doing secret from Dr. Manhattan, who is effectively omnipotent, because Ozymandias found a shadow that Manhattan couldn't see into, and that's why Ozymandias gave him surprise, for which he thanked him and gave him a quick death.
But stories like this do make me wonder, because as much as we as a species know about our universe, we don't know jack shit. All right, so for all we know, it could be possible for a Dr. Manhattan to exist, or somebody to be frozen literally in time, and like a million years later be unfrozen, quote unquote. What the fuck do we know? We're idiots. We don't know anything. You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, to connect us back to the whole like consciousness thing, I mean, I think it's fair to say, like, if a person answers consciousness, it's just, for all intents and purposes, it's in your head, right? Like, it's an intersubjective phenomenon of the mind.
Yeah, careful how you say that, because as well as I do, saying it's in your head has negative connotations.
Well,
okay,
I mean,
guys, we're going to wrap it up in about 15. So make
seriously?
Sure
Come on.
get your thoughts out. Well, I'm going to end the show. You can keep talking forever.
All right, fine. Fair enough, Richard. I love you. I love that beer.
Yeah, I mean, I think just saying, look, that it's an interpersonal process is a valid response, right? I mean, I think that's the purpose of some of these hypotheticals.
Well, right.
Is to try and illustrate that there are no set of parameters you can appeal to that kind of identifies your your experience of consciousness as being something like as objective.
I mean, it is. Okay, I think I said this before. It is objectively true that you're having a subjective experience. Like, you can't deny that.
Well, but how would you know it's objective, right? What are you appealing to infer?
because literally everyone around you, has has a subjective experience. That's like, dude, I know how it sounds, but if you really think about it, it makes sense.
Well,
It's objectively
Midnight,
true that you're having.
Midnight. There's a better, quicker response to that, which is, and to try and quote Tom Jump, is you cannot have your experience and not exist.
Yes,
you
there
can't
you
have
go.
both.
Exactly.
I
Now, whether
would need
your
an argument for
experience
that.
is whether your experience is real or not a dream, brain in a vat, that statement doesn't solve that.
Well, I mean,
But you can't have your experience and not be.
I mean, even if you were a brain in a vat, which if you really think about it, the skull could be considered a vat, and the surrounding the surrounding spinal fluid, you get the point. You get the point. The skull is the vat in this case. So we are a brain in a vat, or a brain in a skull, you could say.
I mean, I think the fascinating thing about consciousness and kind of what these thought experiments reveal about it, or may imply about it, is that what consciousness is doesn't appear to depend on the type of structure that the mind is. It's just referring to certain processes.
I mean, it
that
literally
occur.
does.
Patterns,
It's
No, because you could
No,
just
it
as
doesn't,
easily
Midnight.
simulate something on a silicon chip, right? In the same way that
Maybe.
the brain achieves
hope we can.
neural networks. As far as we know, it's
Does it
plausible to do
stimulate
so.
a nervous system?
Huh?
I think the idea that you could be conscious without a nervous system or a body, it sounds frightening, absolutely frightening, unless that was being simulated.
Oh yeah, that's what I think.
Everything sounds frightening to you, Jamie.
Yeah, so
brain in a vat,
the downside is that not only must you simulate the brain and its neural system, then you must also hopefully simulate data input. Like sensors for said brain. Otherwise, you're ending up back to the guy in the Metallica song, which is not necessarily ethical.
I don't know. I don't know, but
I'm still waiting. Sorry, Sparkle.
No, I just wanted to say I do really love the like the. I'll try again. I do really love talking about consciousness and thinking about it, because I always think, okay, where the fuck does this come from? Like, you know what I mean? There are some people say that the mind doesn't really exist, and it's just just a construct that that we made in order to make sense
illusion.
of.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's
in order to
bits
make
of our
sense.
brain. It's what the bits of our brain projects to work together so that we, at a fundamental level, don't get eaten and figure out which pants legs to put on the first time in the morning.
But just because the mind is an illusion doesn't mean it doesn't have its uses.
What
You know
does
what I
that
mean?
even
We
mean?
always.
What does that mean? What does it mean to be an illusion?
All right, you have your eyes.
Relax, Jamie.
So, Jamie, you have your eyes, yeah? They take photons in, your neurons fire, and then all that information gets processed at the back of your head. That's where your optic system eventually decodes. Then, so that's one system. Then you have your ears. So the sound waves come in, they hit the tympanium or whatever it is, the eardrum. That hits the little snail bit. The hairs in there convert that into electrical signals, and that gets passed into the brain and decoded into your experience. Now, there are some people who've had a brain injury. So what most people don't realize is that it's quicker for your brain to process hearing than it is to process sight. And there's about 1 or 2 seconds difference. And most people, their brains sync that up. So what you hear is what you see at the same time. But that's not real, because there have been people who've had brain damage and they are now living a permanently badly lip-sync reality.
Okay.
Describe it.
That is nightmare.
You're saying.
Yep.
And so, because I've heard of people that like have blind spots in really weird ways where they don't see, and it's just not there in their perception. Like they don't.
Oh no, there's a weirder one where people have functional eyes, but something's gone wrong in their head.
Yes.
and
That's
they
what I'm thinking
can't
of.
decode. So they've got functional eyes. The eyes will still track.
They tell them to like copy a picture and they copy it, and to them they're copying it identical, but it's like totally different.
You know,
And
there are also
But
some people.
that's again into the neural wiring thing.
Yeah,
But
there
it's
are
still-
also. I just wanted to say there are also some people who don't have an inner monologue. Some people who who have I forget what it's called. And
NPC.
There's two. So some people don't have an inner. So I can talk to myself in my head, and I can't think of a better way of explaining that.
I mean, that's what it is.
And,
Just say that.
Yeah, and I can close my eyes and then sort of roughly recreate the picture of the computer image as a mental picture in my head. And some people don't have that either.
Yeah, they don't. They don't have. They don't have. They don't have they have the bare minimum when it comes to to imagination, because what I've learned is that.
Disagree with that?
Who said that?
Me.
I've
known a person who didn't have an inner monologue, and they were far smarter than I was.
I mean, one, you didn't let me finish, and two, I can't really tell who's talking because
That's Peebo.
Yeah, I know, but I didn't know. Usually I can see who's talking, but
because this color of the screen.
Sorry.
Yeah, it's. But
by
no,
the way, nice to meet you. I love your screen name. I always have. I like the way it flows off the tongue.
Why, thank you, Jamie.
You too, Sparkle.
Okay,
Sparkle, finish the thought.
Okay, as I was trying to say, what I've let me try again.
Way to go.
Shut up.
You want to write it down and sing it?
No.
Okay.
What I've found while studying, while studying imagination, how the mind works, is that imagination is something you make use of every day without even realizing it. You know what I mean? Because if you ever run into people if you ever run into someone who says, "Well, I can't imagine myself doing that," I mean, they're not being metaphorical in that. You know what I mean? Like in your mind's eye, your mind's eye, you see yourself, say, doing the dishes, so you go and do the dishes. You know what I mean? It's really all life seems seems to have this this quote unquote pre-planning, pre-path to where, okay, this is the path we need to go down. Let's go down that path. You know what I mean? The downside to that is is that could also happen in reverse. To where you can imagine yourself. You can imagine or remember something in the past, which which keeps you from moving forward. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's. What was that?
I said, yeah, I have had that problem.
There you go. So I'm right. Show over.
That doesn't end the show.
I know. I'm just messing with you.
Richard, I wanted to hear what you thought about the twins with the exact same environment and same genetics.
First, I have to be honest and say I don't know. And then I'll speak about my intuitive reasoning, if that's such a thing. My intuition is that no matter how genetically similar or same two individual human beings may be, they are going to be distinct for whatever differences on a Planck scale, maybe, or something.
No, not a Planck scale. Epigenetically, right?
That's going to be.
What? But those are still part of your code, and they're turned on or off by environmental.
Right. But
So
you're not.
Midnight. Yeah, you have to grant perfectly the same environments. That was the conditions of the thought.
I agree. Perfectly the
identical
same
copies, identical environments on every level. every level to the minutest scale.
But that's literally impossible.
That's yeah. That's
It's law.
Yes, it's impossible. That's why it's a thought experiment, not a history lesson.
Yes,
No,
logic's possible. It's
I
then
logic.
we
know,
may as well
but
go into the trolley problem.
Yeah,
You can't be a
yeah, just go
determinist
on.
if you say that they're different. I'm sorry, you
No,
cannot.
no, I'm just like the way we know reality works. We know there would be, like as I said, neurological wiring differences. Their fingerprints would be different. That's just what happens.
Yeah,
because
You know what I mean?
some of it is apparently random.
But even within the closest tolerance of environmental constraints,
how can you know that?
because we've got real life twins that people have been studying for over a century now,
Sure, yeah,
and
they have different environments,
they physically know this happens. Like they know they have different fingerprints.
Yeah, because environments are different. They have different inputs.
No.
What? The environment does not affect how my fingerprints express.
Well, what does then?
The subtle fractal differences in how your genetic code develops.
Isn't that?
That's
No, because that's internal
environment. That's internal environment.
Oh, it's your it's like granting Jamie's comment of they both have exactly the same DNA, like literally down to the
in every way
spot. As they grow, just through fractal differences, cells will replicate at subtly different rates. That's just going to happen.
I mean,
cell division will take on, for want of a better term, a life of its own. Did I just invoke Jeff Goldblum?
Whoops. Yes. Well, no, but I mean, this whole thing, the talk about, the perfect environment. They both have the same DNA. Discounts epigenetic differences and how those genes are expressed based on that. You know what I mean? I remember reading a paper about these two twins to where they were they were the same DNA. Like they both did cocaine. One twin was fine and went on to become a doctor. The other twin had his life ruined.
Yeah, because the expression one didn't become dysfunctionally addicted to the cocaine and the other one did.
Yeah,
said that right.
Same DNA. Just
okay. I'm a man of my word. I'm a man of my word, which means I'm sorry.
Okay.
And here's how I'd like to conduct the rest of this. One at a time. I'm going to ask you individually this overall question. Do I leave this live and let you guys keep going, even though I'm going to go to sleep? I'm going to mute this and go to sleep. Immutable Destiny, go end broadcast or leave it live.
Yeah, I would say end it.
Okay, Kirk, which was muted. So try again.
End it.
End it. Peebo?
I have to say end it because I have things to do and this is too addictive because it's really great talking to great guys.
They're really, you guys, I love all your brains. The collective IQ, I don't even know what it is. Odeon, I need one more vote.
You can end it. I gotta go to bed.
Okay, we're ending it, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave it on, but I'm going to stop the broadcast. Okay, so anyone wants to stay can keep going. What?
Why didn't you ask me? Ended, of course, but you didn't ask me.
Because there's a limited number, and once it got tilted over the scales, there's no point further. It was, it was a majority vote. It was a majority vote. I didn't ask two people, but that's okay. All right.
Yeah,
all right.
To my channel, guys.
Bye.
You want to start a show? You want me to stay long enough to get for you to get a link in?
That's okay. I got to do some stuff too, but I love these kind of conversations. So if you guys want,
I had a great time, guys. Thank you all so very much. Peace and respect to you all, and anyone who watched it from the side chat, and anyone who watches it later. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, guys.
Immutable, you want to say?
Super. What's that?
Sure,
I can do Immutable. Since Odin and Peebo are leaving, I'm just gonna hang out with Immutable.
I didn't say I was leaving. I voted to end the show so that Richard can leave.
Oh,
I want to actually ask you questions because I haven't hooked up with you for donkeys.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop it. Right, just give me 30 seconds, guys. Peace and respect to you all. Thank you so much for coming by. I want you all to know that I truly look forward to the day that we're all great friends. Peace. Till next time.